Okay, so today we're going to go into 7.1. So this is again dealing with factoring. We're going to be doing exactly what we did last time, but this time we're solving for what is x. So to do that, we just set our equation equal to 0, and we have to factor to be able to solve. So the first thing I want to look at here is the zero product factor. Zero product property. So that says if you have a times b equals 0, then either a or b must be 0. And so what that's saying, if you think about it, is if we have two numbers here, and they're equal to 0, well, if we have a number here, to multiply it by something else, that something else has to be 0 for the answer to be 0. So what that's saying is that one set of those parentheses must be set equal to 0 at a time. So one at a time. I mean, you could have both of them, but that's not going to help us solve. So for example, on the first one, we want to solve these, right? So to get it to equal 0, one of these has to be 0, like we said before. Or we could have it the other way around. And how do we get this to be 0? Well, we need to set each of those parentheses equal to 0. And then solve. And so this is your answer. Or your answers. And that's all we're doing in this section. So this example 1 was like an already factored problem, so we already had it in two sets of parentheses. That was just to get us thinking about that. And now in the next 4, we're going to have to actually factor them into those two sets of parentheses, set each of them equal to 0. So, do you remember how to factor? If not, I'm going to go through the steps again. I'm going to write them kind of small over here if you don't remember the steps of factoring. So remember, the first thing that we want to actually do is look for if there's a greatest common factor to pull out. And then we can go into our steps. So remember, we have our product, our sum, and our factor. We use that to expand to 4 terms. And then we use the box. Remember, we want to fill the inside of the boxes. And then we find out the greatest common factor for each of the rows in the columns. And then our final answer is going to be something with a set of parentheses like this. And if we took out a greatest common factor, it goes in the beginning. So that's a little reminder of how we factor. And now we're going to apply that to this first problem here. So the only thing that's really different and new about this is that it's set equal to 0. That's our only new thing. Otherwise, we're going to factor this the same way. So just looking at this problem right here, let's do our product, sum, and factors. So my product, remember, is a times c. And so that would be this invisible 1 here times this 24. So my product is 24. This middle term is my sum, so negative 11. And then my factors, what two numbers multiply to get 24, but add to get negative 11? That would be negative 8 and negative 3. Now we use our box. So if you need to write it out into 4 terms, you can. So that would be x squared minus 8x minus 3x plus 24. Or if you just know that your new factors there, your terms are going to go there, you can just go right to that step. and then you pull out the greatest common factor between the rows and the columns. So we're going to have x minus 8 and x minus 3. And so just like before, we write out our answer. But then we have our new thing, right? Set it equal to 0. So remember, this is our new thing. Don't forget to do that. Set it equal to 0. And just like we did at the beginning, we're going to set each of these sets of parentheses equal to 0. So if we have x minus 8 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. So we took this one, set it equal to 0, and then this one and set it equal to 0. So x equals 8 for this one, and x equals negative 3 for this one. And those are our answers. Oh, I messed up my sign there. Be x minus 3 is equal to 0. Sorry, and so this should be x is positive 3. There we go. Okay, let's look at number 3. So what you're going to notice about this problem is that it's not set equal to 0. So if it's not equal to 0, rewrite it so it is set equal to 0. So we would have 4x squared plus 26x plus 40 equals 0, because we just moved that over. Now this is set equal to 0. So remember, our first thing, is there a greatest common factor? There is, it's 2. So we're going to take out 2 from each of these terms. And don't worry about the 0 yet, because we're just factoring. So our greatest common factor is 2, so when we take that out, this is what we're left with. And then we want to do our product, our sum, and our factors. So we have 2 times 20, which is 40. Our sum is 13. And our factors are going to be 8 and 5. So I'm going to transfer this over into the box. Take out my greatest common factors. Rewrite those in my parenthesis form. Remember, I put my greatest common factor back on the outside. Now we're not necessarily going to do anything with that 2. We're still just going to set our sets of parentheses equal to 0. And those are our 2 answers. Okay, let's look down at number 4. So if we notice about this one, it only has 2 terms. If you look back at the top of our notes, oh wait, stop there. Sorry. So we'll just write it down here. If there's only 2 terms, remember how to factor that way. Remember, that middle term is kind of there, but it's really just like 0. So you could rewrite it with that if you want to. You don't necessarily have to. So let's first take out our greatest common factor, which is 4. Now there's actually 2 ways we can solve this. So I'm going to show you guys both ways. First is just the original way that we learned. And so that's where we're going to take that 4x squared, and if you need to, put 0x there so you remember that your b is 0, you can. And then we'll do our product, sum, and factors. Remember that for this one, you take the square root of 25, because this is a perfect square. And then we would do our box. And then we have x plus 5 times x minus 5 with that 4 in the front. And that's set equal to 0. And then we set each of those sets of parentheses equal to 0. And so x is going to equal negative 5, and x is going to equal positive 5. Now the other way that we can do it is using the square root. So if we have 4 times x squared minus 25 is equal to 0, we can just take this parenthesis here and set that one equal to 0, and then we have x squared equals 25, and so we take the square root of both sides, and x would equal 5, but remember it has to be plus or minus 5, because negative 5 squared is 25, and positive 5 squared is also 25. So you could do this either way. If this makes sense to you, go ahead. If not, then just stick with the original. Okay, let's take a look at our last one here. It's kind of long, but we just want to set it equal to 0 and then simplify. I would first set it equal to 0 and then simplify, otherwise you might get some of your signs confused, because you can't combine these two necessarily until you move it over, because this is going to become a positive. So I would just rewrite it first. Notice how our signs change when we move them over to the other side. And then we can find out our like terms here. So we have these ones here with the cubed. So we have 5x cubed. We have only one of these, so minus 35x squared. And then we have these with the x's that we can combine, so plus 60x set equal to 0. Now if you'll notice, our greatest common factor is 5x. So we're going to divide 5x out of each of these. And so we will be left with, on the inside, x squared minus 7x plus 12 once we divide all of those out. And then we're going to take just this section here and do our product, sum, and factors. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put this right into the box this time. And then we're going to take out our greatest common factors for each row and column. So our final answer would be 5x, what we took out, and then what we had on our sides, and we set that equal to 0. So we're going to have x minus 3 set equal to 0, so x is going to equal 3. X minus 4 will be equal to 0, so x will equal 4. And now we need to do something with this 5x. So we're actually going to also set this 5x equal to 0, and x will be 0, because at least 1 must equal 0. So if these two right here are not equal to 0, then this one must be equal to 0. And so we're going to actually have 3 answers for this one. And one side note, if you're wondering, am I correct on these? When you're going through, you can plug your answer back in. So you can take this one is kind of a long one, so let's go up here to these ones here. So you could take this -4, for example, and plug it in for each of these x's, and when you do, you should get -40. All right, and that is all of our notes for this one, so we're just factoring, and then you just set it equal to 0. And the next section, we're going to learn about another way to factor.